I'll pause it.
Yeah, once we get it set.
Did we hear back from, it was the town's attorneys or MMA about, the ability to change the ordinances and have those people like not grandfather their homes in? Did we hear back from that?
We sent a letter to Lorna, and asked her if she could send it to MMA, but that the same thing that, retroactivity ordinance, the new ordinances, but they have to, correct something or improve. So she has sent that out.
Okay.
We haven't heard yet.
Haven't heard back.
What this status is.
Capital. Oh, worked last time I did it.
Capital L, capital I.
Oh, capital I. I didn't get the dot. I thought it was a dot on there. There you go.
Lynn, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hey, thank you. Charlie Beta.
All right, there we go. Let's see right.
3 minutes late.
Hello.
Hello, you are.
Hello.
Hi.
Great.
I don't see, sure.
There's a couple over there. Got one right here.
Oh, thank you. Hi, hello.
Probably might grab a seat. I mean, a table would make it in there all on shields, so.
That's good, thank you.
They all roll around.
Yeah, they do. Thank goodness.
I guess this is probably gonna be it.
Yeah, I think so.
How's your hip?
It's good. It works. So, now it's, pretty easy recovery so far. So I just need to, not over here. But it's too.
That's not easy in the spring.
What's that?
It's not easy to not.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. Going upstairs is slow, if you do it the right way.
Okay, I called to order. I've got all the folks here already written down, so we're all set for that.
Okay.
Old business, a consideration of the April 23rd minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review them and they felt it was
To be accurate,
yeah, I thought it was especially good. I think Paul put a lot into this, realizing that this is going to be a document we're going to need to refer to back with some of our decision making on here. So that was very helpful. Today our discussions on strengthening Belgrade septic system ordinance.
we want to, I guess I move to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Yeah.
Second. Seconded.
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor?
All in favor?
You're still the chairman here.
Unanimous. Minutes approved.
I have a little bit of information that I'd like to share regarding buffer, something that happened this week.
Sure.
That's
sure.
pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I've been arguing with the Lake Smart people for over a year that the Lake Smart evaluation is not only of a standard that's very hard to meet, but anybody who has a house that's close to lake cannot pass.
Yeah.
And I've been to many homes where the buffer is excellent and still it cannot pass. So the point became what are we here for? Are we here to encourage people to create effective buffers? And if we are, we need to be able to let people know that this is what one looks like. And if we're gonna do that, we have to give out some awards.
Yeah.
So finally, I got a call from Belgrade Lakes last week saying that they've devised an assessment for homes that are too close to the lake, and they're coming to do mine next week. So we'll see if I get to keep my Lake Smart award or not. And then they're gonna give me the tool to use in my work as the Lake Smart person. So I thought that I don't have it yet. I take some sort of training in a week, I think. But I thought maybe that might help us, because clearly the point is that a one size fits all will not work and will only confuse all the town. Because every house is that picture.
So we need to accommodate everybody if we're gonna have buffers.
Right, I mean, my take of the ordinance is you establish an ordinance and then, if people can't comply with the ordinance because of some reason, then they need to get some sort of permission to not be in compliance with the ordinance as strictly written. If you write an ordinance to let everybody comply with it, then it's not gonna be worth much. I wouldn't.
No, you don't want to do that, but you do want to state what a buffer could look like. And also, it's really hard to get people to understand what these things are. I was beginning to think that the recommendation that we do a 10-foot no mow zone. So my experience has been that when I start with people and they don't want to do anything, I go, just don't mow for 10 feet in front of your lake. And they do it the following year, they hate it. And they want to know what else can they plant there. So, you know, part of me feels like, let's go for whatever people might understand and can do. And then maybe raise the bar. I don't know. I've been thinking about it all week. But the idea that I finally got Maine Lakes to really look. The other thing is, it's not like most of the homes would be able to meet that 100-foot buffer rule. Most of the homes wouldn't. Somebody new would.
But you're thinking about, well, I think of my family's property built in 1932. The corner of the main porch is probably 8 feet from the water.
Yeah.
But it's 850 feet of shore frontage, and most of the rest of that would comply just fine. So if you just think of one spot where the house is, then, and get caught up on that.
But
then,
that's again, that's one example. There's 150 variations on that still would not match, is all I'm saying.
so what would you suggest?
Well, that's what we really do need to come up with, and I think maybe describing what we want to see and something minimal might be it. I don't have the answer. I hope we can start talking about it though, and coming up with what it might look like. But I just want to share with you how hard so I've been doing this for 3 years. I have given 3 awards. And believe me, many more people deserve awards.
So what is the under the previous rules, or not the new rules, or how far back would a house have to be?
Well, it was less about how far back, although that was, so it used to be only 5 feet. Now it's 10 feet or more
This is for lakes.
of a real buffer, and a real buffer,
10 feet.
10 feet of a real buffer is 5 layers of vegetation growth.
Right.
Which most people don't have. And if they don't have an old canopy, even if they start planting trees or a tall canopy, they won't have it for a while. So that's another thing that we're considering. If people invest and do everything that they're supposed to do, but it's going to take years for them to attain it, you know, what do we do in that circumstance? So all I'm saying is that I think, I believe it was Hans who was suggesting that there are so many variables here, and it's not like there are just a few of them. There's a lot of them.
Any reaction to that?
I agree, because many homes camps are too close to the lake, they're built, prior to shoreline zoning. So they may be 10 feet, 20, 30, and you know, people need to walk to the water and they've already been cleared pretty much. So it's kind of hard to get 5 layers of buffer. As you said, it's something else.
And a lot of people, you know, they moved in and they cut all their trees down. So what we're starting with is getting them to understand how to protect the lake. And really, I think that a lot of this is gonna have to be education. I know that's not what we do, but we're gonna have to do some of that.
Well, yeah, but our mission is
Is to
to
write
write an ordinance.
Which is
Uh,
great.
And then we have to figure out enforcement later. That's the way I mean, I don't think you can sit there and say, well, we can't enforce that, so let's not write an ordinance. You know, that's.
I agree.
That's not gonna save our lakes, and I think considering what's going on with North Pond and East Pond, we need to save our lakes.
Right, absolutely. And you can't, if you don't have anything to enforce, I think you need to start off with an ordinance.
Yeah,
Right.
Absolutely.
Just looking at our bylaws, the last sentence. This is about our authorities and duties as a committee. It also develops educational programs to achieve greater public awareness of the value and need for natural resource conservation within Belgrade, which
There you go.
leads us into,
So that's the Lakes and Natural Resources Committee,
yeah,
mission bylaws, which is different than the ordinance, so.
Yeah.
So that's, so we need to do both.
we need to do both. Once you have the ordinance,
Education and ordinances.
they go hand in hand.
Right. Charlie, what do you think about you've seen the shoreline around and know the difference between, or the vast difference between properties? What do you think, how can we work, you know, considering those constraints?
Specifically with Lake Smart or generally?
No,
I mean,
make an ordinance.
just start the ordinance, how would the ordinance, you know, is it an issue if the ordinance, if people can't comply because they have a historical situation, can we get an ordinance that will require them to go in the right direction perhaps? What do you think?
I do think so. You know, I think there's the 2 options are having, you know, sort of carrot and stick. So I know there was some discussion about on the carrot side, providing incentives to do the right thing. And that could be, you know, tax mechanism or otherwise. And then the stick is the ordinance and making sure that it gets done and what's realistic and practical and something that people would vote for. I do think that the grandfather issue should be addressed at some point, whether that's requiring, you know, a 10-foot buffer or a 25-foot buffer, or we had that discussion. I still think that's the right discussion to have. Whether we get to, you know, something at the end of the discussion remains to be developed, but and for properties where, you know, you're not going to move houses. So, you know, if arguably in the more impervious surface, closer to the lake, the bigger the impact, you know, in general, depending on the slope of the land and everything else. So, you know, somebody that has a house 25 feet from the lake ought to have a, you know, a buffer that's even bigger than, you know, 10 feet. Ideally. So, you know, that's a tough, you know, maybe working situation for the CEO to, you know, handle that variation. But you know, I think if it's simple, straightforward, you know, defendable from a science point of view, I think you can, you know, at least make the case to the public and let people vote accordingly. So I don't know what the right ordinance is, but I think we can move in that direction, and it's worth having the conversation for the reason you say, what's going to really make an impact on the lake. The things that we can control are dirt and septic systems, waste. So any standards of improvement around those, not just for properties, but for roads. Roads are a big factor. On a per acre basis, they're probably a bigger factor than the houses. So at least according to the models. And, you know, should be treated accordingly, I think. Because, and the roads are always connected to the lake from ditches and streams, typically, you know. Some of it's in the middle of the woods, nobody cares too much. If it's anywhere within that, you know, close to a ditch or stream, or within 250 feet of the lake, it's gonna have an impact. So it's there's acres of dirt roads that are, you know, I've been looking, I'm writing a grant for the Long Pond watershed right now for the next round of 319 money, and also helping on the Meslonsky one. And, you know, just the amount of impact that happened this winter, with 10 inches of rain in December and 10 inches of rain in March, has had a big impact on a lot of the roads. You know, I've got videos of roads getting washed out. So it's, so I do encourage us to pay attention to roads in addition to residential properties. But you know, the more buffer, the better. It's just, you know, and yeah, and what's the right mechanism for that, you know, in terms of carrots and sticks, I think is worth talking about.
How much of that road area that you're talking about is within the shoreline zone?
Well, if you include streams, a lot. You know, so.
What do you mean include streams?
Well, you know how shoreline zone includes stream buffers?
Sure.
Yes, that's what I mean. So there's a lot of streams that are crossed by roads, that the roads and the ditches next to the roads right into the stream, dumping all sorts of material, which, you know, has a quick trip right down the lake.
Yeah, sure, but if that happens outside the shoreline zone.
If it happens far enough away and it goes into a, you know, a hillside, you know, we do that all the time when we're rebuilding camp roads. We put in what we call turnouts to get water off the road and into the woods.
Oh, right.
And so if you're 1,000 feet from the lake, we were at that road workshop. I don't know if you went to that a couple of weeks ago.
No, but I wasn't at that one. I've been at others.
One of the presenters said that, you know, whatever's dumped into the stream and the ditch moves about a mile every 10 years or something. So that's 5,000 feet. So what gets dumped into the ditch this year may not get to the lake, but 5 years later it may get to the lake. So there's a delayed response. Even if we did everything perfectly from tomorrow on, there's still this delayed response in the system that's going to be coming downhill over the next decade. So anyway, so we should think about how to, you know, short circuit that through, you know, both ordinances as well as incentives like fixing roads. And that's where the 319 grants, these grants that we get, you know, we cost share with homeowners and road associations, fixed driveways as well as camp roads. That's a good way to get a lot done. We have found, working in the watershed. But you could also require people to maintain roads at a certain level. And have, you know, then what's the enforcement mechanism for that? You know, is that taxes or fines or what have you? Or reduce taxes for doing it right.
How many of those roads do you think are town-owned roads at this point? That you're in your study and your.
Well, it's both, but most are private.
Yeah, right.
They gravel.
They're
roads.
within, yeah.
Yeah. Mount Vernon.
45%, I'd say.
Are private.
Private.
Yeah, as a guesstimate, yeah. Because most of the towns have paved their roads, but there are, you know, the poorer towns have unpaved roads. Like Mount Vernon's got a couple, Mercer's got a couple, but even Smithfield, which is not a rich town, you know, most of their roads are paved. Most of Belgrade's roads are paved. But you know, in looking at the roads around Long Pond, there aren't many obvious problems with Belgrade roads. Rome's got a kind of on Watson Pond Road, they need to do some more ditching, they need to replace a culvert and stuff like that. But you know, there aren't many in Rome either, but Mount Vernon's got, you know, 3 streams that are, you know, washed out, every one of them washed out last winter. big ones, and, and if you put in a bridge, you're talking several $100,000. So, so there's issues around the lakes that, some of which are town roads and some of which are, but most of the towns, like you said, are, paved, which is good. And most of them have, I've seen in the last decade, because I've paid attention to it, improvement in, for the most part, in ditching, putting armor around culverts to keep it from eroding. But DOT's got some lousy roads. On Castle Island Road, that culvert there is too small, washes over the road like every other storm. Several similar in Mount Vernon on Belgrade Road. DOT's really got to up their budget and take care of some of these smaller culverts. On 225, Robbins Mills, that comes over the road, washes out the corner twice a year during these big storms. So it's not limited to private roads, but I'd say the thing with the private roads, you've got all these gravel roads that are right next to the lake, and then sometimes as many as 20 driveways going downhill right into the lake. So 20 times 100 feet adds up to do the math, and it's half a mile right there of gravel road that's exposed to erosion, and about half the driveways are pretty good. People are starting to use bluestone, which is great, but half the driveways are not good. They're not crowned, they're not maintained with good materials.
So what kind of ordinance, if we're talking about the shoreline zoning ordinance for roads and driveways, I mean, what is there any suggestion or anything for us to consider regarding that? I mean, we talked about a number of other septics, buffers, but I'm not sure we put on that agenda or that list, right? Anything on roads specifically?
Well, I mean, I just wrote it down on
Yeah,
the
it's on our
scratch
list.
pad here. I mean, we've got town road, but this is private roads and driveways.
Right, but is there any suggestion as to what maybe, at least for consideration,
Sure.
discussion?
Up the road you have down at the Seven Ways Alliance, that parking lot,
Yep,
that's fairly effective, isn't it? It's fairly,
the porch pavers.
yeah,
They're good, except that you don't want to put sand in the winter, because it fills in all the gaps and then it's no longer porous. So as a result, you end up having to snow blow it.
okay.
And for any kind of big road or parking area, that's not very practical in Maine. I think it's great down south.
Okay, what about the mix of gravel and asphalt, it's not an asphalt road, but it doesn't really wash a lot of the dirt away.
The bluestone we find is kind of the best that we found for good gravel for a road. And it would be expensive to require it because it costs 50% more than the regular surface gravel, but it works better. It's got less phosphorus and it holds up better to plowing, and it holds up better to storm events. So
what is bluestone? Can you describe it as
it's a product out of Pike Industries in Sydney, and they blast I wouldn't call it ledge, but they blast rock, and then they have all different sizes. So they've got big pieces for riprap,
right?
And then they have this 3-inch three-quarter inch minus product with a lot of dust in it.
3/4 inch non-specific. That's what I buy. So that's just the stuff it's crushed. It's crushed rock is what it is, right?
Yeah, and it packs really well.
Yeah.
And it has less dirt in it, and it still has fines, which is good. So when it does erode, it's again, it has less phosphorus. But
a potential ordinance, and I'm not saying that this is something that would.
well, any new driveway or roads, you could require it. It would be tough to retrofit every mile.
Under the ADA, when they have rules about when you resurface a parking lot.
Yep.
Or do substantial work to a bathrooms, like a full renovation. They don't force people to go in and put ADA compliant handrails and signage for handicap, except when you're doing a full renovation. So like on a road, and just thinking out loud, a road being resurfaced. at that time, maybe there could be a requirement for something like that, right? I mean, then you're
Yes.
resurfacing it anyways.
Yes, yeah, you can do it to certain standards. It would be complicated potentially, but I think we encourage, sort of good road maintenance. There's a lot of maintenance involved with gravel roads.
Yeah,
And so it's not only building them right, but maintaining them right. It's kind of basically like saying with a septic system. So if you plow it hard and you don't, and you may end up with a lot of gravel in your ditch and the ditch stops working, it clogs the culvert or it doesn't have the capacity anymore. So it overtops the ditch and then it erodes the road. So that we see that all the time. So, so maintenance is a big factor. I would say if you get a permit to do a driveway or a road, you should build it to a standard. And that's kind of easy to do comparatively, as opposed to going back and looking at every road in town and giving them a 3-year period or something reasonable, 5 years to make the improvements to the road. What happens if they don't have the money? So that's always the conversation is, we can encourage good behavior, how do you force good behavior?
So, and then excuse my ignorance on this one. I thought that a dirt driveway, except for something that's pointing right down to the water, was better than a tar driveway because it allowed water to like absorb in and not just run right off.
Mm-hmm.
So with those, they've been so compacted by the tires of the car that it's basically become impervious. You're not going to get as much infiltration as it would be if it was like a lawn, but so it's negligible, the amount of infiltration that you get on a gravel road.
But that bluestone is a little better with that. Is that the idea?
It holds together better. It doesn't infiltrate. It's more that the way that the rock blasts is it makes it a lot more angular, so they lock together like puzzle pieces and just fit together. And when you oh dang, what's the word?
Okay.
Yes, when you compact it with properly, the bluestone locks together better. I think one option would be to prohibit the use of bank run gravel on roads, the round rocks, since those just kind of roll off a lot more than any sort of crushed stone. And then you're not specifying a specific product, which could be considered like monopolizing if you send everybody to Pike to get the bluestone.
But what'd you call that again?
Sand gravel.
Bank gravel?
Bank run gravel is just right out of the
regular stuff they get on the
that
ground.
guy's working on with a.
And that's why it's round. It's because it's been in a river.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't pack well because it's round.
Right.
So I think we,
okay.
I think we need to move on.
Yeah, we do.
I think we need a separate,
We need a whole separate roads thing.
separate roads.
Agreed.
And
Sorry about that.
stuff.
Got on a tangent.
So, and we've touched on the buffers, so we'll, let's get into septic. I think everybody, wants to go anyway. So we had Dave, is it Roke or Roke? Yeah, Dave sent around, I hope everybody had a chance to look at that, it's really helpful. He basically he sent a couple things that everybody should be taking a look at. One was the ordinance, an outline. I think this is kind of, when he comes here, which I hope he will, we can ask him, but I think this is the outline that you would then take this to an attorney and have it turned into an ordinance. At least that was my take on it. Do you guys think that that's, which one are you talking about? The
Logic behind proposed ordinance?
yeah, the one that starts logic behind proposed ordinance, and that was for, I believe. Narrow level and great. So I think that was helpful because we're gonna need to produce something like this that would touch on the changes we want to make to ordinances, and it's more of an outline, it's more regular language outline that needs to be then turned into the legal framework of the ordinance, but that was really helpful, I thought.
Yeah, that was, this was excellent.
That's great. And then there was the, then he sent last night, I think it was, when he could not make it to this meeting, he went through the scratch pad and basically addressed all the points of it. So I think this is going to be something we need to, maybe we can talk about the ideas that he presented and then get him in a subsequent meeting. Would that make sense?
Kind of.
So we can talk about those now. Would anybody have some thoughts about they got from his information?
If I have a question.
No, go ahead.
I just have a simple question, and that is inspecting a septic system as simple as looking for saturated soils and standing water on the field, on the septic field?
And maybe
And that's what it implies. Is that really all there is to it?
That's if you're looking for a failed system.
That's what I mean. Well,
I mean, that would indicate failure.
failure,
So an actual inspection, is in some places mentions, periodically. That would require like soil boils to see, soil bores.
yeah, right.
I'm getting my vowels
Right.
to see how saturated, how deep it goes, how deep the drainage is.
so that would be part of a regular inspection. If we were saying we want to have all septic systems inspected regularly on 3 years or whatever we would come up with, is that what would be? Maybe you could outline how would that inspection proceed?
Well, right now, you would basically call somebody, a few companies that have scopes that they'll put down a clean out or a drain,
Okay.
and they will do a visual inspection from the inside out. That's just looking at the infrastructure of your system,
Inside out of what?
pipes.
In the field.
Yeah, they'll
Okay.
send it out 100 feet or however far, and they'll follow the pipes, make sure there's no fractures. And they'll see if
Okay.
it's root infested. This is the kind of inspection that occurs when a property is
I
transferred.
did one last week.
Oh, really? Okay, I
You
didn't.
have a scope, you could look down at, it goes down 150 feet.
Oh, really? Okay. So,
But if you really wanted to do an evaluation inspection, you're gonna have to do soil samples with a bore and see what the soil condition is like below the field. Site evaluator is the guy that comes out, he designs the system to start with. So they're state licensed and certified. It is not something that your local plumbing inspector does. It's not inexpensive.
now, well, keep in mind, when the property changes hands, the concern is that the system is functioning well, and that it's, that it doesn't need to be replaced in the sense that there are some broken pipes and so forth that will need attention soon. From our perspective, the concern is that that it's functioning from the point of view that it's not going that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and that it's not contaminating the groundwater and short circuiting to the lake. So is that necessarily, would that be the same kind of test? Or would we be looking for something different?
You need to talk to somebody at a higher pay rate, because where it ends up, where it goes down, it's below the surface. You can't see it. Is it getting into an aquifer and then transferring up into a spring that comes up in the lake?
Yeah.
Or is it just infiltrating soils and seeping into the lake? I mean, you can use dye methods, but your soil is a filter. So the dye might actually get filtered out for a number of years until it's saturated soil to the lake. So
You'd have to measure. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Please, yeah.
I was gonna say, you need to figure out how high the water table is the first. Okay, so first step is you have to figure out the type of soil that the septic system is built on. Second step would be to figure out how high the water table is, and then the distance between the bottom of the leach field and the top of the water table will tell you how much phosphorus is getting removed before the leachate hits the water table and thus goes into the lake.
So do you assume that the water table and the lake are continuous? That as soon as it hits the water table, it's basically going to get through the lake?
Well, once the phosphorus hits the water table, it's not going to attach to any soil particles because it's in an aqueous form. It'll just flow to the lake eventually. It'll take years, but it's not going to be uptake. There's no uptake once it hits the water table.
But you could also, another issue would be not just the water table, but bedrock as well. So if the distance between the septic field and bedrock was minimal, it might short circuit along the bedrock, or if the bedrock was fractured, it might infiltrate the bedrock. Is that right?
Yep. So it's basically the same sort of idea where it hits the bedrock and then just the water will travel along the surface of the bedrock because it can't infiltrate any further. So if you have an adequate distance between the bottom of the leach field and the bedrock, it'll be treated. But if it's too short, it short circuits. The same for impermeable layers like clays. Anything that the water can't continue to percolate through to interact with a larger volume of soil particles, that's what's prohibiting the phosphorus from being taken out of the water.
Okay.
Usually when you have get your septic permit to put a septic system, you fill out the H 2000 or 200, which shows where the water table is and the type of soil and the type of construction. So that, I think that what Lynn's talking about, it's going to show the high water table. And
if they go that far.
If they go,
if the table's that high, yeah, it'll show. But a lot of times you don't see water.
It's down deeper.
Yep. So this would be more for legacy systems and figuring out whether or not they need to be replaced or if they're causing a problem.
One takeaway I got from Lenny's the chapter that you circulated on septic systems was I think it was came from Minnesota, where they said that a failed system could put 4 pounds of phosphorus in the lake, and 4 pounds of phosphorus could result in a ton of algae.
Yeah.
So that was like,
that's a lot. Yeah,
that's a lot of algae from one system. And I mean, I can think of 2 systems that I know within the last 5 years have been going into the lake. And those are just ones that I happen, friends systems, relative systems, and just like, you've got to be kidding me. So there's 2 that I can think of on Great Pond off of the top of my head without knowing a lot of properties on Great Pond. So that just seems to me to reinforce why septic would be a really important
and I think that fact is going to be really helpful trying to, as part of education and trying to get people on board and excited about this ordinance, about making, because that's a scary number. When I read that, I was like, wow, I had no idea. And I think people hearing that is going to help people be excited about the ordinance change.
Right. One of the things go ahead.
Sorry. So that example, I think was with 2 feet of separation between the bottom of the leach field and the septic system. So imagine how much larger that would be if the septic system was built directly on top of bedrock.
No, it's I just have to think that around the lakes there must be tens, hundreds of systems that are essentially letting their phosphorus go into the lake. And that, so an ordinance that requires an inspection would have spotted the ones I can think of. It would catch a lot of worst offenders.
And how would that inspection find them? What would it see? And so,
Well, with one I can think of, it would say that there's a cesspit here, which is within 50 feet of the lake, and it's dry. And they live there year round. Yeah, so think about that.
I'd rather.
Yeah, and then the other one I can think of was there was a memorial service, I'm sure a lot of you went to it, where somebody said, wait a minute, but slow down on the bathrooms right now, because we got an issue, right? And it's right next to a gully that's going right down. So that's those are pretty easy to spot, I would think, and there gotta be probably hundreds of them like that are that old. These are old.
The ones that are older, pre-72 or whatever, then there were some that were quoted as, pre-91. I was curious as to what records does the town have on septic system designs, do we know? And how far back it goes by chance? I know you're still fairly new in the job, but I mean, is it something that's been kept for a long time when people applied and had their designs done and it's categorized? Or is it not something like that?
There's an electronic record that I'm working through, and I've got, I'm gonna say about half of them cataloged and almost completely uploaded to our new GIS system. So each property, probably some from 97 to current, has their septic design online.
Because the reason I ask is that if we have any ordinance, there's not enough inspectors in the state to get it done in any short period of time because of what's involved scheduling, plus they have other contracts. And it seems like if there is some sort of ordinance, that there might be a priority of, I don't know if you want to go by years or not, because that necessarily doesn't get some of the worst ones out there, but it's like, would we be able to identify systems that are over a certain age, for
And that's
example?
the other issue is the ones that are older than that were done like in a Word format, and they weren't consistent with their lot identification. And when some subdivisions were done, they just used the parent lot as an identifier, and then like had 15 systems targeting this lot, and unless the designer was good with his illustration, you can say, all right, the shape of this lot matches here or this corner, and I can, go backwards and put a specific location on it and save it, and but I can't just assign random systems to for description. So, and in the Word format, the other thing is they just signed it with a street. They didn't even use map and lot numbers.
Right, so it could be any.
So it's very random.
We looked at Smithfield's records because we were looking at, this North Pond algae problem, and we focused only on the vulnerable soils. So it was about 120 lots on the lake on poor soils. And of that, about half the systems had been installed after 95. About a quarter of the systems had been installed between 74 and 95.
Right.
So at least after the first standards were adopted. And then a quarter of the systems, we couldn't find either any records, basically couldn't find any records, either at the state level or at the town level.
Yeah, the state records are
even worse.
Yeah, they're worse than
the towns. And so I think this points to especially for Ponza State and in all the towns, but in whether it's Belgrade or Smithfield, is having the record keeping system electronic to really make improvements on that record keeping going forward. And then as time permits, maybe looking at those older records. I noticed what Dave was recommending is going after the low hanging fruit, either the old systems.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking about. I mean,
systems that don't have any records, systems that are on poor soils. So, and that makes sense.
Cause I know when I scheduled to get, my septic system, you know, I wanted to have it inspected when I bought the property and then later had to do an expansion because it wasn't sufficient and all that kind of stuff. It took like 3 weeks just to get somebody out there. This was during, you know, years ago before all the big boom was going on. And then it took, after I got that inspection, doing recommendations, then it took another 2 weeks to get another guy to come out and do an actual, site evaluation, I think is what it was called, and the design. And then from there I could do stuff. And I'm just thinking, you know, if we pass something that makes sense and everybody's like, hey, this is great, and the town passes it and it's all good. That's a lot of properties out there, and many of them are probably in compliance that are newer ones. You know,
Right.
but the old ones, no records, how do you identify that though necessarily? I don't know, but seems like that's
Well,
where.
you really gotta go by every map and lot and then see if you can find a record. I mean, that's what we did and spent, you know, a day at Smithfield Town Office going through all the septic records, but only 100 in town. Yeah, because we were focusing on the lake, we were focusing on the poor soils around the lake. The other thing, even if they were installed 30 years ago, which is where the new standards came in, 94, 95, if they haven't been maintained, even a well-maintained system might be ready to change out after 20, 30 years.
Right.
So, but, you know, I've heard Dave Roque say if it was installed right, designed right, and maintained right, it should last indefinitely, which is good news. So, that also keeps the cost down in the long run, you know, encouraging that, you know, timely maintenance and, you know, that pumping and everything else.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're thinking that from a practical standpoint, there isn't enough bandwidth.
At least not in a short period of time, I mean,
Yeah,
over
right.
years probably, but. What do you do with, I can imagine, I'm not sure how many inspectors there are, but when I was calling around, I couldn't get anybody. This is some years ago now, so it's probably like 9 years ago, but. And I finally got one guy who answered a call and he's like, yeah, I can get out there in 3 weeks. And I was hoping to get it inspected before I bought the property, that didn't happen. So I was like.
Point, when they discussed this at the legislature, I was there when they were talking about forcing people to get an inspection at the time of sale. The time of transfer, and they were saying the same thing in the legislature. It's on the record that either there aren't enough people or the people that are there, half of them don't do the proper job because of training. So it is a big overhead issue for us to be able to implement it, and, you know, on a large scale. So maybe you do go through, you know, selective, not enforcement, but selective inspection. You know, go after the more obvious problems and then, you know, little by little, take care of all of them.
And again, I'm not sure how you write that into an ordinance necessarily, but there's that practical point of how do you actually get it done? And if there's a way to write something like that, there might be more buy-in to, you know, because it's like, well, I just did mine 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, let's say, just outside the 3-year window. Is that a priority? Probably not. But the one that's never been inspected since it was put in 1970, that probably to me seems like a priority.
Right.
So I don't know how you write that in, but.
To start with the older properties.
And as you mentioned,
Right.
the poor soils, because we know apparently, right, for the lakes where the poor soil.
That's science-based. Yeah, there's maps of them.
Right.
And yeah, exactly.
Was
If you
North
look in,
Pond helped by this?
Pardon, sorry?
Was North Pond helped by this?
Well,
Anything that was done?
that remains to be seen down the road, because it was written into the final report, but so right now it's part of the knowledge base, but nothing's been done about it. What did happen is the North Pond Association wrote to all their members within those 100 camps, saying that, you know, starting to ask about maintenance, and when was the last time you inspected it, you know, et cetera. So they started a conversation. It's more at the outreach level. The actual getting things done on the ground or in the ground hasn't you know,
Nothing.
it hasn't happened. It may have made some people aware of it, and maybe they tested it, and maybe they fixed it on their own. Have you heard anything about it being over in Smithfield?
No.
Okay, so I'm guessing it's just at the beginning outreach stage. We also don't have really good data on the phosphorus getting from these bad systems into the lake. They traced not nicotine, caffeine in the lake. They found there's a way of testing for caffeine in water, and they found it along the shore in some of these areas, but it never went beyond that to finding out which of the systems, and you need to spend some money and knock on some doors. But having the lake associations as partners, I would imagine half the membership would line up to do it, knowing that the lake is at stake. Personally, I think people would, if people talk about people being afraid to find out, I think most people would want to find out if they give a damn. And what you do about it is another thing, but you know, you want to know if your basement's leaking or, you know, your house is leaking. So again, whether you can afford to fix it is another issue. And the same with the septic system. You want to know if it's causing a problem. I think 9 out of 10 lake association people would. Other people may not care, but.
Lynn, did you have a comment, Lynn?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you look in the example ordinance, the Brink ordinance that was sent out, they actually have wording to how to assess and assign properties to different levels of severity, basically.
Yeah, that's
Right, that's
the logic.
the 3 site levels, is that what
Yep.
you're talking about, site level 1, 2, and 3? Yeah.
Yep, so you could base the ordinance on that wording to get to which sites need to be evaluated first.
Yeah, I looked at the level ordinances online and I didn't find this language in there. So I'm not sure whether this has been implemented or not, but.
It does say proposed.
What's that?
It does say proposed.
Yeah, maybe they're going to be, maybe we can follow their lead. That would be awesome. So if they've done the language for these changes, we can look at that.
And if I may, Charlie, follow up that caffeine study. I've always felt that if we could get a list, meaning the plumbing inspector, of the hot spots.
Yeah.
That we just do a letter to the houses within 100 yards or so. Just so it's an awareness letter. That, look, this higher concentrations were found that directly leads to the cause of phosphorus.
And we know their soils are not great, and even if they were installed right, we're not pointing fingers, we're just saying, even if they were installed right, and even if you've maintained them, they may just not function well because of that situation.
Yeah, but an awareness letter,
Yeah,
you know how they are, they're gonna talk to each other.
but I think also a little financial incentive, whether it's getting a grant to, you know, test systems and do it for 50 cents on the dollar to the homeowner, you know, the homeowner should participate, but that would lower the barrier of entry, so to speak, and get more done.
I would think the lakes associations would be
Helpful.
really helpful in that sort of non-ordinance effort.
Yeah,
to try
it's
to.
all part of outreach and fixing.
So in a case where you find that a leach system there is failing, obviously it can be failing for several different reasons. When you're going to go and say replace the whole system, I guess there are 2 options. Is just one is to try and find another place to put it, and the other is to remove it and then bring in appropriate fill and then replace it in the same location on different kinds of soils that have been brought in. Is that?
I'm not a site inspector, so you probably know more about this than I do, but you can also have more advanced systems that, you know, actually treat the effluent in a way that you can make it, you know, so it's relatively benign, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what Seven Lakes Alliance has a system like that.
Okay, yeah, so it's more treatment at the tank.
At the tank.
Yeah.
Yeah, they use them on the coast where they do have nothing but bedrock.
Right.
You'll see pipes discharging into the bay. Well, that's clear water running out of it. They've got treatment systems in the basement.
An interesting thing they did at Seven Lakes is they put in 2 leach fields. And they're connected, but the substrate, the soil, I believe it's under the leach field. One of them they put in alum. The same stuff they put in the lake.
Yeah.
And then the other is just normal fill, gravel. And the water, they tested the water under each of the leach fields. And the water, under the one that had the alum had much less phosphorus, than the other one. That'd be an easy thing to implement in a septic design, or a leach field
But
design.
we talked about that,
Yeah,
when you weren't here, but apparently the alum, over time, the alum is
It doesn't
neutralized.
get saturated
It gets saturated
with phosphorus,
Yeah,
but, you know, it did its job for 10 or 20 years.
yeah, right.
Yeah, and maybe you put in an extra inch of it, you know, to maybe last 30 years.
Right.
Yeah. So there's things that, you know, over time you could implement,
Sure.
you know, go in with a, you know, get a beachhead kind of ordinance and then, you know, add, improvements to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any, more comments on this? Any other thoughts? Well, we could go through, Dave Roque had gone through the points on the scratch pad to say that, yeah, to comment on them. I don't know if anybody had read through this and had any thoughts that jumped out on it.
I did read through it. One thing was, he didn't like my idea of the, no fertilizer in 250 feet, but I understand where he's coming from. I went back and read the state report again. And their recommendation is that same thing. It says the phosphorus, you can buy the fertilizer without the phosphorus, but just the nitrogen. And it was the same concept, whereas if you use the liquid version and absorbs in, that is less of a problem. So there is some science that I didn't clearly read the first time around. I still feel 25 feet is too close, which is the state standard. But he felt like, yes, but try to get some grass growing without some nitrogen, in his comments, is challenging, and that's probably true. What if you are trying to put in that new septic or fix it, and you gotta put grass on top? And a lot of the soil these people use for contractor soil wouldn't grow dandelion weeds, you know, so I see where there might be some fertilizer requirement. But maybe it's just that we have the type without the phosphorus, and it is clearly labeled. I went to Home Depot and looked at some phosphorus, and like, oh yeah, they do put that on there. So
they do put what on there?
the phosphorus indicator, so you can get fertilizer without phosphorus.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I didn't really pay attention to that.
Oh, yeah.
path.
There was a gentleman, who was deceased some years ago, named Bob Jolie, on East Pond, who was promoting, fertilizing your properties, shorefront properties with just nitrogen fertilizer back in the 90s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, this gentleman agrees, and the state talks specifically about that. And recommended you don't do anything within those zones with phosphorus, but then no fertilizing within 25 feet.
Right, okay.
I mean, I don't know, it's not I just felt like it seems like that's a really low hanging, easy thing, is that if you're fertilizing a lot and then you get a big rainstorm right after, it seems to me that just washes right in. But that's a surface style application, and the liquid kind might be a better source. So I still feel like there should be some language in our shoreline zoning, but maybe it doesn't have to be the 250 feet, and maybe it just talks about the lack of phosphorus. Again, enforcement. I know it's impossible, but some people follow things just because they read it and it's like, oh, I didn't know that and I should do that. So I'd rather have something like that written, even if it's not really enforceable in that, because what are you gonna do? Sit there and camera on everybody's yard 24/7? Probably not. Well, you might be able to
say it's an awareness thing.
It is
Put
awareness.
in there and they read it, now they're aware.
And then they don't do it. So, well, some don't. Some will do it no matter what, some won't. But I do understand the phosphorus is the part that the state really talked about not having. And in fact, I think I read it is that there's actually some sort of fertilizer ban at certain times a year that contain phosphorus in the state. I'd have to go back and reread that, but I don't know if that's true, because Home Depot seems to have the same fertilizer all the time. And it doesn't seem like they changed that out.
Well, if you get a fertilizer that's 10-10-10, you've probably seen that, that's
Right.
for your basic fertilizer, so it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and
Potassium.
potassium, thank you, so it's right on there, so
Right.
you just gotta have 10-0-10 or whatever, to achieve that.
But again,
Excuse me, there's another type of fertilizer you can use, it's seaweed. And that's readily available, and that's what a lot of the, down by the seashore, they use that type of fertilizer, so it could be included here.
And that has no phosphorus in it?
Correct. Seaweed,
Well, yeah, seaweed, but
so it's really, reasonable, I don't know, but that's what they use down by the coast.
But this goes to the idea that people feel like they need to have lawns. And so a bigger educational piece might be, what else, people are beginning to understand, I hear about it on the radio, people talking about transferring their front lawn into a vegetable garden or into a butterfly garden or this. So word is starting to get out that lawns are not necessarily the only thing you have or the most beautiful thing you can have. So that's that other piece of it altogether.
I think a lot of that's coming from places that are short of water. And so a lawn eats up a lot of water. So if you're living in Las Vegas, maybe you want to consider something, an alternative to that, like AstroTurf or something.
Well, I think you're
That people realize that lawns are not good for.
Right, no, I mean,
lady, you're absolutely correct. Putting butterfly type of gardens out there, et cetera. The water, just get it from the lake, that's all. That's not an issue.
so what else? That's a prompt for you to start talking.
Yeah.
Are you once mentioned to me that you knew a lot of inspections per real estate? That some 80% had issues.
Yeah,
Are you still finding that problem with inspections? Is it at that level or has it improved over time?
these aren't like inspections that are kind of, they're more like a cracked, lid on a septic tank or the baffle's wrong.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're totally gone. We had one last week, it was totally gone. Not in the shoreline zone, but just, things that have been, this was one, pre-1973. Wrong.
Right.
So that, as we've talked about here, things break down, the leach field just kind of disintegrated. The piping was fine, everything was fine, and then you go down there, you go, nothing's working. So it's, yes, it's older systems, typically you're gonna find it. They take them wear and tear, and oftentimes they weren't built to, if they're that old, they don't have the same engineering and same design criteria they do now. So it's where older is where to start, because that's where they fail. Usually it's the old ones. You see them on Peninsula Drive in Rome. They've been there, 35 years, cramped little systems, and they got going into them.
You gotta mow, that's one by one last week.
Yeah,
There's half a dozen trees growing on top of the septic.
yeah, they're right in it, so it's just, they kind of use it and forget it, they're not there all year, so. But I think it's good practice to start at where they're most vulnerable, and that's older systems. That how I think I like this, the logic of this ordinance, it's mostly inspection. So it's not, that's a good way to start. How you could inspect all the ones we have in Belgrade, in the shoreline zone. Would be a chore. Especially even in the ones, pre-1974. Find out where they are, who owns them, how you're gonna contact them. But it's something that'd be a good first step to, maybe say get the most problematic.
And Charlie, did you say that there was a spot where, or a location where the different types of soil is mapped?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
where is that, so that we could reference that?
It's part of, state GIS databases, so it's a state soil survey. Now, there's a caveat there, anybody does soil work, and Hans has that map right there.
Actually, I think Paul shared these ways.
Oh, right now.
When you actually go out and inspect those properties, you have to do a local evaluation, you know, is the soil what it shows on these maps, because these maps are general, they're not property specific. And so you really need to, you know, verify that.
So, like Charlie said, DEP has a link to all the whole state.
Yeah, we
Mapped
just
it out.
figured that
And
out.
our new system that's online from the town, the Access GIS. On the left side, there's a thumbnail for layers, and you can look at soil types. If you play with those different layers, don't fill them all on, but one at a time, see what it offers you, you can get to this map.
And they have, you know, a list of the kind of soils that are vulnerable. You know, or that have shallow bedrock or something like that, all of that's in there, in that database. So you can then do what you've done is highlight those so that you can see them on a map.
Right.
And then you can, the other thing is, you know, talking about record keeping, do you have all of your property tax records, GIS encoded? So, or I know that you've got tax maps that are available online, but are those really a GIS layer? Do you have that? And because I think you need that long term in terms of the town.
What is the GIS?
Well, that way you could look up a certain lot, you know, map such and such, lot such and such, and then pull up all the rest of the information with that, whether it's the soil layer, whether it's the plumbing inspection reports, whether it's, you'd have a much more comprehensive database right on that one property. And it would make your job, I would think, a lot easier, you know, gathering information.
I don't think we have soil layers, but I am uploading the septic designs. Ian in the office is uploading a tax card that the town has. It already has the acreage, the owner's information, you know, some basics, but I don't think it has the soil type.
Yeah, I was only aware that within our watershed, Oakland has all their tax records, meaning the property taxes digitized, but we're in a big hole here. You know, Belgrade, Mount Vernon, Rome, Smithfield, all those towns, none of those records are digitized from the property tax, which makes the CEO job more, I think, more difficult in terms of accessing information quickly and easily. So one of the things we thought about and talked about at Seven Lakes is trying to get a grant to do all the towns. And maybe, you know, the same way, maybe each town can chip in some money, go to, everybody uses Sewell, I think, to do their mapping, or almost everybody. And they could do it. It's just a matter of how much it costs, because they do it the same thing for Oakland. New Sharon is all digitized, but they're all outside of our, right at the heart of our watershed, which just makes administration tough.
What's our next step with this? Is it, we want to Dave vote back in, or is that gonna be beneficial, or?
I would think so. What does everybody think?
If he's willing.
Yeah.
You know, and it might be, other questions might come up that.
Dave's good, you can pick his brain, and
Right, that's what I mean, yeah, so you can ask questions.
he helped write the standards back in '74, so he's been around a while, so, yeah.
And I think this. I think it was I'm glad we had a chance to go through this kind of ourselves and mash around.
Yeah,
Before he's here.
before he comes in.
Yeah.
Now we got ideas, we've got some minutes.
We could actually start with writing new zoning rules for septic systems, just start right in. I mean, he'd be the great guy to help us. I mean, he actually has a format.
Right, well, yeah, I'd like to know where this went, you know, this, I think this is level, and it'd be nice to know where that stands.
Is that on Keezer Lake?
Yes. Oh, yeah, it was Keezer, which, and you look at it, it looked like it was, Keezer may be more than just level.
Yeah.
But it looked like it might have been level, so that's what I went to look at. But beautiful lake, and then I was looking at I looked at, Google Maps to see how many lawns there are in Keezer Lake. There aren't many lawns on Keezer Lake, so.
That's good for them.
Real advantage compared to our lakes.
It's pretty mountainous there.
Yeah, and it's just all forested. I mean, I could see there were a couple of places that had lawns, but yeah, you could count them on 2 hands maybe, but.
It makes a difference.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. And it's, I mean, it's a beautiful lake. It's very clean, and I don't think it's got the issues that our lakes do. One question, you hadn't come in yet, but we were talking about vegetative buffers, and if you have an ordinance that says that everybody has to have X amount of a vegetative buffer, what ordinance did exist right now where it says to what's the language, to the greatest extent practical or practicable, or what's the, I mean, sometimes there are there's language in ordinances where you have to say, like, to comply, you have to move a house, or you have to add on to the greatest extent. Am I thinking correctly here?
In
To the
shoreline,
greatest practical extent.
To
exactly.
the greatest practical extent.
If you're gonna put a foundation under a house that's within 25 feet. Or, yeah, basically, if you're gonna lift it up, it needs to be moved back to the greatest practical extent.
Okay.
And a lot of times, you know, there's a holding tank right behind it, or
Right.
it feels so it's, or right away even. We've done a case within the past year where the right of way was 3 feet from the back door. So they can't move that.
Right.
And what I like to see is if the house is that close that you don't have the option of putting a foundation under it, they're not going to disturb those soils.
Yeah.
Take that option out.
Right.
So if somebody is within 100 feet of the shoreline zone and
Of the
have-
shoreline.
like you do, wouldn't it be better if they just had that they couldn't do anything within 250 feet and just preserve, you know, just make their shoreline zone larger?
You mean
know what
like
I'm
the
saying?
100-foot buffer larger?
Yes,
Because there's
make
rules
the buffer
for,
bigger in the back, even though there's a house there.
I guess where I was going with this was, if we had an ordinance that said that there has to be let's say 100-foot vegetative buffer. And we had in there to the greatest practical extent to the, so if there was something, so that there was some language where there would be exceptions allowed for, does that make sense for the ordinances that you see? You see that there, I mean.
Well, right now, there's no ordinance requirement to have a buffer, it's just you can't touch a buffer. If one exists, you can't.
We don't have to make.
So the whole creation, again, I go back to like, Pinkham Cove is a great example. They got a lot of 50-foot wide lots. There were fish camps. They don't have, this one guy's doesn't have 40 foot to the right of way. And you're gonna tell him he has to put in a 10-foot buffer, well, that's 25% of his lot. And well, the house is only 14 feet off the lake, so how does he get from this 14 feet is walking through weeds?
Well, he can still use it. He can still use the
Well,
property.
But he also bought the property with the intent to use it the way he bought it.
Well, right,
And now they take
but
that,
he also
That was
bought
a fantasy.
it on the lake with good water in the lake without algae blooms are smelling and, you know, hurting people. So I guess there's maybe it was in the book that chapter that Lenny circulated, is that we're sharing this lake, and so therefore you don't necessarily have all the rights to use your property that you would someplace else without that right. So,
Right now, he's got those rights, and you're trying to take them away. That's the guy that's gonna vote this ordinance down, so. Figure out what part of this ordinance you want to do first,
Didn't somebody
and
mention,
then start chipping away at other things.
didn't somebody mention that most of the people on the lakes aren't voters?
But we also get only 80 people who, how many people here came to the last town meeting?
No, this will
I
probably.
ran it. I didn't see any of you there.
I was there.
Oh, you were there? Oh, yeah, you were. Okay.
I was there.
But I'm just, so I didn't see you, but my point is, only 70, 80 people show up at town meetings.
This-
And
this
so
will
what you're
This will
saying,
probably won't go to town meeting, this will probably be a.
except for there's a special town meeting coming up in 2 weeks, it hasn't been announced that there's gonna be something that we're all gonna be voting on, which about 12 people will show up to.
Yeah, right.
Which they can do that, right? So,
I was told they only have to be 1 week's notice for it.
right, and so my point is, if it turns out that it's a in-person meeting, you will get voted down on pretty much anything, because you get 12 people who show up and band together, they can pull the vote.
But yeah, I think ordinances go to a secret ballot.
No, we just voted on last town meeting an ordinance, right? The camping ordinance that got approved, right? They don't have to. So the camping ordinance went through, which basically you can't camp in now in public way, which we didn't before. It was just a preemptive ordinance, I think. But that was, right at the town meeting. I thought so too, but I got educated on that, so, because I had to run the meeting, so.
Yeah, well, we did the whole thing with the mooring ordinance back a few years ago and went to a secret ballot.
This is, and now at the town meeting, somebody could also vote to make it a secret ballot, but then it would be done right at that meeting. It's one of these things.
Doesn't get you anywhere.
So
Still get the same attendance.
you still get the attendance, so I'm not saying that what you're saying isn't true, but I do think we have to. And that's probably gonna be up to the others, not just us in this committee, but. There has to be things that we can pass, not with the idea that, well, most people don't live in the town who own lakefront property. I believe that's true, but I believe there's quite a few people who do live in the town who have waterfront property.
Yeah, sure.
So there is that realistic approach, is all I'm saying, is that, and I'm agreeing with you, Hans, is that there's probably things that we want on a wish list. And then there's the things that really can get through, and maybe we don't decide that, maybe that's done at the planning board meeting and then the board of select board. But it's just something to be aware of.
And I think the septic ordinance being a separate portion, keep that out of the shoreline zone is a great thing to do, just keep that separate.
Like its own separate ordinance.
Yeah.
And have reference to shoreline zones in it.
Right.
So
As well.
even though we only wanted to apply to lakefront properties, it would not be in the shoreline zone, it would be outside of it, you think?
Create its
Just
own
rewrite a
ordinance.
whole new septic.
Septic ordinance,
Like this-
define where it is.
Like this example is,
Yeah,
and then you can reference shoreline zone, but you're also governing some properties outside shoreline zone that have the direct runoff down a steep hill that could be ledge and end up in shoreline.
How do you distinguish one's outside shoreline zone that would affect the lake? And how do you say, oh, that one may be 600 feet away from the
So you
shore,
don't,
but it affects this.
you don't make it property specific, you make it in a zone, you make your standards.
I mean, we actually draw zones on the map and say, this is the zone we want.
No, just make the septic, rules for septic systems.
I don't think that,
Plain rule.
we're not talking about townwide rules, are we? Or are we?
It's this example ordinance is what they've done.
And what they did in their ordinance is I couldn't pull it up just now for some reason, but is that there's reference to shoreline, that there's a different set of rules in there, or additional rules, I should say, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you're
Well, it says
inspecting.
requires all septic systems in the shoreland zone, and then it's here.
That this is not a shoreline zone ordinance.
No,
That's
yeah, sure, okay.
Well, it says-
But I was asking, Hans, you were saying you could include some septic systems that were not in shoreline zone, but that would affect the lake because of.
There's some rules for all septic systems outside of shoreline zone as well.
Well, this says a septic ordinance in the shoreland zone.
I mean, the rules are the same, no matter whether they're in the shoreline zone or not, aren't they?
Basic rules,
They
right?
are now.
Yeah, no.
They are now, but this ordinance that I believe you're referring to is for shoreline zone. The one that, Dave Rowe sent, the logic behind it.
Yeah, so the logic for keeping it out of the shoreline zone, ordinance would be what? Would be,
Well, I think that's just, if I could put words in your mouth, suggesting if one gets voted down, you want the whole thing to be voted down.
Yeah. So if this is separate and it's not acceptable to the voting public, you're not losing your whole effort.
Yeah, that's,
Because one ordinance that covers, say, 7 things,
yeah,
and one thing is the
Standalone.
issue that people say no to, all 7 go down. Whereas if there's one that is its own separate, and 6 in my example,
yeah.
and another, one might go down, but then these 6 still could
Have a
pass,
chance, yeah.
or whatever.
Well, not only that, but you'd actually could have an effect by, setting up a new ruling for septic system.
Well, there might be new standards anyways, from when the last time it was written, I have it up here, but I didn't read the whole thing, I don't know. But there probably are new standards from the last time this was updated, our regular ordinances,
96, was it 96 it was last updated?
something like that, I mean, it's 90s, yeah.
Yeah, the mid-90s, yeah.
another viewpoint would be that if it's all in the shoreline zoning ordinance changes to it, that voters that don't live on the water may not really care. They may look at it and say, well, it's a shoreline zoning, I don't care.
Right.
You know,
It's not-
and not get into it versus it's sticking out as here, look at this here. So anyway, that's just, I still was trying to get at the question that, when you're enforcing, ordinances and it says to the greatest practical extent, how do you enforce that? What is it? How does that, does it go to the planning board? Do you personally do it yourself or?
No, that is a planning board function.
Okay, so that would be, so,
If it's within 25 feet and it's gonna be moved back in shoreline zone. Unless, let's see, if it's a conforming lot, no, it would be non-conforming, so anything non-conforming goes to planning board.
okay. So there's no other examples you can think of that, because I'm still trying to kind of go to the vegetative buffer concept, and if it said to the greatest practical extent, 100 feet to the greatest practical, or to the greatest practical extent, how would that be enforced? And do you think, because that wouldn't be a planning board, that would be a CEO perhaps.
So you're talking about having a vegetative buffer required within, say, 50 feet of the lake. The water body, stream, whatever. Or to the greatest practical extent. Well, you gotta have some definition in there.
Okay.
So
So
that
that would have to be
to a structure, to a rock wall, to a right of way, or it's kind of arbitrary to just say greatest practical
Right.
extent, because when they're looking at moving structures, you're looking at physical barriers. You know, primarily, you know, is it worth sacrificing 12 trees to move a house back 20 feet?
I'm just thinking if you had a 50-foot, 100-foot buffer in the ordinance, and then some language that said basically, if it doesn't work in your property, you know, there's a way to judge that. And who judges that, perhaps? I mean, I'm just trying to think about how you would, we don't want to make the ordinance all for the fishing camps, you know, all for the places that are not going to comply with any buffer at all.
No, but we also have to think about resource protected areas where there's severe slope. People they have mobility issues. They want to put in a path.
I mean, maybe we can't even just do a septic system ruling because we're supposed to be doing shoreline zoning.
Oh, there's that as well. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'll introduce myself here.
Yeah, yeah.
My name is Peter Sturge, and I'm on the planning board, and I'm interested in getting in this committee, and I'll be on it for a while. And, I can, answer a couple of questions that you addressed to, Han, but I'll just back off a minute. I've been here 30 years on the lake, living here in Great Pond, right? So and I've been on various committees over the years. And this is committee, this committee here, what I understand is gonna rewrite the shoreline zoning. The planning board, we went through a rewrite of the shoreline zoning law around 2018, we passed it.
Right.
Town, okay? It took us about two years to go through it, okay? So I'm kind of curious to ask you, what's your timeline here?
We don't have a timeline, in my mind. I don't know,
Not really.
we know that it's gonna take a while.
Wow.
We're willing to work with, an indefinite timeline. We're trying to come up with changes to it that make sense for a water quality, standpoint, to be more strict than currently exists. And so, yeah, I mean, we understand this is just the start of the process, and it's gonna go planning board, and then it's gonna go to there's the attorney in there, select board, there's, the DEP is in there. It's a long process, yes.
So, I hear watershed. How many towns are involved in this study? What towns we talking?
Belgrade.
But this is a town of
Belgrade?
For us in our committee,
Yeah.
and what we're doing is, again, more or less just recommendations.
Okay.
You know, to the
Okay.
planning board, select board, and all the others.
And obviously, select people are aware of this committee, et cetera, and you're taking minutes, you're very organized, great.
They said,
they authorized us
they
to.
set it up, you know, they wanted a little history, because
Yeah,
there was some talk about having an ad hoc committee and getting town, you know, people from the planning board, select board, you know, the code enforcement officer and others to tackle the problem of looking at a review of Belgrade shoreline zoning. How can we strengthen it? Not particularly any one thing, just look at it. We're basically fact finding. So we went to the select board and said, we can do it. That's in our charter.
so we meaning the
Lakes and
shoreline, the
Natural-
Lakes and Natural Resources Committee, so, which is part of, we've got, you know, part of this is the Lakes and Natural Resources Committee, which is a committee of the town. We've all been approved by the select board and sworn in and all that. And then we formed an ad hoc committee that included some more people, that, to add on to that, to come up with more, a larger committee that would hopefully bring in other viewpoints. And then we've been bringing in experts for specific, we were supposed to have Dave Roque for this meeting, but he was unable at the last minute to attend. And Lynn is also, she's on the phone, Lynn Geiger from Seven Lakes Alliance, but she's a member of the ad hoc committee, so hopefully going to attend every meeting.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah, that's pretty much right. I understood. And I was thinking, all right, you got Great Pond here, and you got, how many towns are bordering Great Pond? You got Rome. You got Sydney over there. You got Mount Vernon.
Great
Pond is just Rome.
Just Rome and Belgrade on Great Pond.
What about?
But
Sydney?
Messalonsky has Sydney.
What about Oak?
I mean, bit of Smithfield, right up by Great Meadow
Okay,
Stream,
you
but
got Oakland though?
no.
Okay, so this,
Yeah.
all right, now. Hopefully, so how do you, so you got those 3 towns. How are you gonna put together some rules for Belgrade? But the other parts, the problem.
They might not do anything, and they might be worse.
But that is one thing Seven Lakes wants to do, is to take best practices from an ordinance point of view to each of the towns.
Right,
And I know Rome is having conversations like this too, about strengthening their ordinances long term.
And they're gonna be looking at what we do here, to hopefully propagate that into Rome as well.
right, and that brings me up to, we get Seven Lakes Alliance, as I understand it, Seven Lakes Alliance is a hybrid type of watershed.
It's a what?
Well, it does land work and it also does water quality work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you heard of watershed, organizations. Now,
That's what Seven Lakes Alliance covers the entire, the watershed for the, 7 Belgrade Lakes.
right, so I don't know what that, okay, you got Damascotta watershed. That's a difference from Seven Lakes when it's organized.
Yeah.
Okay, and you got Corbison watershed, right? Torrey Pond, not Torrey, but, is it, on the other side of, Augusta, Togus Pond. They're looking at, forming a watershed, all right?
You're talking about a district, a legal watershed
The
district.
watershed, you know, legal entity controls.
Oh, that's not what this is here.
Pardon me?
No, that's not what.
And Seven Lakes is not a legal entity either.
Right, so why couldn't this discussion be held on a watershed basis? Why can't Seven Lakes Alliance, these groups here, other towns too, lakes associations, get together and form a watershed? And then with a watershed, it's a lot easier to monitor if they get funding down the road.
Well,
Because the other, three examples I just told you, have done that, okay?
Denny
Why
Cashel.
why can't we do it here?
Denny Cashel, you know, I'm sure you remember Denny Cashel, who's been around, was around.
Yeah, he did a white paper.
He was trying to do that for quite a while. There are a couple of reasons, to answer your question, a couple of reasons why. It's difficult to get the different towns to cooperate with each other just because they like to do their own thing. And it's actually, it's a political process that has to be approved by the legislature, if I'm not mistaken.
The Cobbessy one was.
Yeah, and it actually hasn't, a watershed district, which actually has taxing power, has not been approved in the states since then, as far as I understand it.
I think it's only one of two, or.
There's only a couple of
Saco
states.
River has a special
It
district.
hasn't been done for like 50 years, so it's been a long time. And it was Denny Keshel's opinion, after having looked into it and worked at it for quite a while, that it wasn't feasible to actually get a watershed district established with taxing power. And he was trying to he was attempting to get the various towns to just work in a communal way together, but even that was difficult. So, I mean, what you're suggesting has been tried, and it certainly should still be tried. And I think what we are doing is I can't speak for the other people here, but myself, I'm involved with Seven Lakes Alliance. I'm on the board of directors, as is Pat here. I think what we're trying to do is to sort of lay some groundwork here. And Belgrade is kind of the central town amongst a lot of other towns. I don't know. I sometimes hear the number 13 is all the number of towns that are involved in the entire watershed. If we can get an ordinance together, an improved ordinance, so to speak, the select board's charge to us was to try to come up with an ordinance that was closer to best management practices. That was their term, as I understand it. If we can do that, then we can take it around to the other towns, to Oakland and to Sydney and to Rome and to Smithfield, and maybe with Seven Lakes Alliance. Lynn is, very much involved with this, and others. And maybe we can then start to cooperate around doing some of the same things.
Yeah.
But as it is right now,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, and I'm glad we're talking about this. I don't know if people had this conversation or not. Have you?
Yeah. We haven't had this specific conversation, but it's, but sure.
Yeah, and another piece of it is, have you talked about the water level of the lake during the winter time, summertime? But that causes a lot of erosion if it's not done correctly on the shore.
Caused a lot of problems this year.
Yeah, so.
It's up and down.
Talk to the folks on the dams committee.
Right. So that brings up the point, well, dams committees. You got 3 different dams committees on the 7 lakes we have here, okay? And they all do it their own way. if you had a lakes association, if you had a watershed, former watershed, the dams committee, we working together and be paying attention to the different water levels in the various lakes, they're all different, right? So I think, you've got, the effort is great, but you gotta give a thought to, you may wanna change your thought process a little bit, to get the other towns involved. Again, I just, you're taking an awful lot, you know, like you talk about, some of these things you're not gonna get through, all right?
I don't think so either.
So, and you got some businesses here in town, you got Hammond Lumber down there. If you're gonna do some of this stuff, you may wanna think about getting Hammond Lumber up at this table here, so they can say what they think too. So they're a very important part of this town, so you gotta keep that in mind. So I'm just letting you know.
That's good feedback.
So,
Good
okay.
point, very good point, thank you. Yeah, a couple, 3 weeks ago, I met with the Rome, Lakes Committee. They just started that up, they started it up because we had one. I told them how we've, changed the Lakes and Natural Resources Committee. They said, oh, we should too, because it covers all this stuff. So things are growing. Rome is, always had a pretty good code enforcement and a lot of active people on their planning board. So it was kind of a natural fit. As we, go to the other towns, in the watershed, it'll be more like a new introduction to them. Charlie and Seven Lakes and Lynn deal with them all, all of them, but not so much us from Belgrade.
Yeah, that's great, and, and you might, you talk about, East Pond and North Pond, and you got, Snow Pond over there. They don't know this is going on, so you may, somehow or another, you may want to think about copying them, some of the Lakes Association people over there, what the minutes are
We're
here.
from Friends of Messalonsky.
Right,
You are?
and we
Okay.
I live
report,
on there.
Alright, okay, so you're copying it, the Lakes Association, does the East Pond know what's going on?
Well, I'm not on the association, I just pay my dues.
So I know, I'm just saying, you may want to invite East Pond and, the North Pond into this, and maybe they just like to have these copies of the minutes. So they can kind of meet the press what's going on and tell their people. So this is should be a group effort as far as the lakes go, not just Great Pond.
Yeah, well, no, well,
It's
this
not
is.
just Great Pond,
This
it's a town of Belgrade,
Right.
and we've been charged by the select board to look at the shoreline zoning ordinance. And with the thought of trying to improve the ordinance to maintain or protect the water quality of the lake. So that's kind of what we're thinking of. I mean, the lake level, it doesn't seem like it's something we can do with our ordinance.
Well, you can. You got a dams committee, you could lay out some, best management practices, where to have the water at in the winter time, or the summertime.
The dams committee would tell us, I believe, that what they do is entirely circumscribed by the state.
Well, I've been on the dams committee twice, and that's partially correct.
Okay,
It's partially incorrect too.
okay.
So there's a lot of leeway, okay,
Yes, sir.
I'm just saying, right?
Okay,
I've never seen the lakes go up and down so much as, I've looked.
It's pretty radical weather we've had, so they do try to anticipate for a normal year. But how would, in your mind, how would the shoreland zone ordinance be modified to affect the water level? Well, how would that
Okay,
play out?
all right, during the winter time, you bring it down low.
Mhm.
You wanna have it low. So after, Columbus Day, drop the lake down, all the boats are out this and that. Drop it down, you drop it down about 6 inches vertical. All right, and you keep it down there, and it comes ice out time, what happens is, you wanna have that lake down low all the time, because you don't want the ice pushing up, having high, the ice pushes up the shore and destroys the shoreline.
Right.
All right, now, and then, when you have ice out, the winds change from the north, and goes around to the south in a period of 2 weeks. And you get a lot of wave action, maybe about 1.5 feet, 2 feet of winds. Well, that winds, the wave wash against the shore, and the water's up high, it creates a new shoreline. Right, so you have a tremendous amount of erosion in those 2 weeks or so, if the water is too high.
Right.
That's how, and then of course you bring it down, you know, and then you bring it back up. Come, in about after your 2 weeks after the ice up, you start bringing it back up for the summer people, have it normal.
So how do we rate that? What would the language look like in the shoreland zoning ordinance to do whatever you think we should be doing?
Well, I can write it up. I just paraphrase it,
Just write it up like that.
yeah, basically.
That the lake level should be changing according, and that would be in all the lakes in Belgrade.
I would say, before I would say that, I would wanna talk to every one of those lakes, those dam committees for those lakes. And you got 3 dams committees, and right now they don't really communicate at all. I've been on the dams committee twice. So there's room there.
Write it out, that in the ordinance. I'm just trying to think of how that language would look in the ordinance, and what does everybody think about that? How would it play out in the ordinance?
I think that
Set the levels of the lake.
I don't know enough about how those committees work, so I just don't know, but I feel like the Oakland one, because that's the one that, you know, Messalonskee, it's in Oakland. I'm not sure that they would necessarily say that we have governance over them in our Belgrade ordinance.
Yeah,
They're
they make
private,
electricity.
they're private,
Last spring when we had the flooding. And everybody's docks were in, and everybody's docks were flowing in Messalonskee everywhere. I went to Oakland to get my mail, and I saw there was some guys there at the dam, and I went and talked to them, I go, what is going on?
Right.
And they said, and they told me that the Wings Mills Dam hadn't been opened.
Yeah.
The guy slept, that's
yeah.
what they told me.
If it had
And
not
they
been
said they
open, then
knew that when they opened their dams wide open, that they were gonna flood. What's this?
Yeah.
The stream, and that they knew 6 houses were gonna be flooded.
okay.
so he
But they
had,
were, you know, they just said, well, too bad, you know, so we've got to do what we've got to do, but.
he hadn't opened the Wings Mill. And I'd forgotten to do it or didn't remember, and somebody called me the next.
He slept.
And then the next day opened it, and the problem is the Oakland Dam can't be opened as much, and so Messalonskee filled up.
Oh,
I had to go out and take all of my boards
So it
off,
really happened in a 24-hour window.
Yes.
Yeah.
but it's because they're not communicating with each
And
other.
then somebody else told me that
You're right about that.
there's one place where there's 2 openings, and there's another place where there's only 1 opening, and is that true?
Well, Salmon Lake, Ellis Pond, that's
Right.
one small gate.
Yeah,
Wings Mill is 2 very broad gates.
yeah, and 2 can't go
The
into
Village
1.
Dam is 2 smaller gates with greater depth, and so they're all built differently, different
Yeah,
times,
And
different.
they each have their own cadre of people who are, you know, in that.
well, those
doing the
3
dams.
dams are supposed to be coordinated, supposed to be, I'm not
Well,
saying they are.
I found that out.
See, so we can do
They're
it.
supposed to be coordinated. Well, in the last 10 years, those 3 dams have all had some automated equipment installed that they can control them much more easily. I don't know much about it, that's all I'm just.
No,
I know that stuff's been installed.
Within, for the Belgrade one, that's correct, but for the
Oh.
East Pond and
In North Pond, no, those are.
And then
those
on
are
the,
early.
on the
You're gonna
Snow
have
Pond, which
Yeah.
is down the Oakland end, CMP, whatever they control,
Yeah,
they do what they wanna do.
they do.
Well,
They-
that,
they-
I think we could,
I mean, I can tell you from having, I've had some, personally had some interaction with the folks who control the East Pond and the dam at North Pond. About control of their dams, only to the extent of just reporting what their lake levels are. So that could get reported, in the summertime in the Belgrades, along with the lake levels in the other lakes. And they guard that information so carefully that they just didn't want their information reported. And so they are, they just don't want to, they guard their control of those dams so closely.
Wow.
That it's, it's going to be, I won't say it will be a fight, but they're not going to give up what they're doing easily.
Well,
But what the hell are they being so secretive?
Good
Well, yeah,
question.
there's a lot.
National security.
Well,
I can tell you.
in the case of
Because
North
the dam
Pond,
keepers
they-
are the dam keepers.
in the
They have a personal interest in
Investment.
their property,
Oh,
so much
right.
water on it.
Yeah, well, in the case of North Pond, they've had, over the years, they've had a lot of trouble with people doing damage to the dam, and each individual has his or her own reasons why they want the water in North Pond to be higher or lower. And so they will either bust something or build something up or whatever, so they just want to, you know, they don't want to sit talking. And I think on the
This is
East
why
Pond Dam, it
Timber
has to
are
do
not
with
working together.
relations between the two
Yeah, if we had a water
ponds,
plant,
yeah.
it would work.
I know, no,
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
originally, that's what I
Anyway, those might-
believe
I
that
tried
we
to
should
bring
do.
it up, I just
Yeah,
wanted to-
No, I think it's a great thing.
So we're 15 minutes over, 17 minutes over on time right now.
Are we getting time and a half
But
now?
can I just, in regard to the damn thing,
To the dam.
I don't mean it that way. Could this committee just take it in their interest as an erosion issue? And invite the dam people? I think the dam people need more people looking at what they're doing.
Sure.
Now,
Sure,
is Oakland controlled by, Florida Power and Light?
I think so.
It's a hydro company,
Yes.
so they have
It's Florida
mandatory releases.
Power and Light. I
Maintenance.
don't know why they get our
We
electricity.
could certainly we could invite them to come in whether they would or not.
Yeah.
you know?
I think Dick
Would
Green,
be interesting.
Dick Green,
Oh,
Oakland.
no, we're talking about whether the folks from Oakland.
Yeah.
Florida Power and Light come in,
I'm sure.
yeah, you'll be.
Usage in July.
Yeah.
That
Right,
that
for the
dam,
last half.
all of a sudden the light goes down, right? Because they want to make some power.
Yeah, to get more money,
I guess.
So I doubt we get them in, but.
But you might try from Friends of Maslonsky, although we have a new president right now, and I don't know that she had such a friendly relationship as our previous president did.
With who?
With the Oakland dam people. So I'll make a
We could
note
ask for help
to,
from the old
should I?
president.
Wanna call Linda Warner?
Well, I think we should put this on the list,
Okay,
lake levels and,
Erosion.
and then we can work through, lake level affects erosion, that's what I put down. So, and then invite, dam committee to, talk to us.
I think we probably should try to get, the gentleman who was supposed to be joining us tonight that gave us all the,
They
Thank you.
Kind
We
of
might want
finish
to try
up,
to get him
finish
in next
this
time.
topic up.
Yes, I think,
To
yeah,
to
we'll,
hopefully wrap up septic and then move on to
yeah,
whether it be dam or roads or what have you.
yeah, I think we should.
And make the ruling for septic systems so that it would cover everything. So, would cover shoreline zoning for sure, but it could be applicable to the rest of the town.
Well, and we have to, no, we're looking at shoreline zone. You have to have a good reason once it goes beyond shoreline zone.
All of them can be one of the recommendations is.
Yeah.
Separate
Yeah.
ordinance.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so, our next meeting is,
In our last month,
I don't know how we got here, Lenny, thank you for calling, our attention to that.
Right,
So somehow we,
Yeah,
made this extra meeting
Yeah.
for.
I don't know why.
So our next meeting is the 28th, correct?
28th,
28th of May.
same time, same place, same people.
The 28th.
Kimberly, you taking minutes,
I took notes and I'm gonna review the recording
thank you very
and I
much.
will get the minutes
As long
out.
as you recorded it.
We're good.
Yeah, that's the only hope I have with all the conversations that go on.
so here's the rest of these maps, you might wanna keep this stuff together.
How many people will be here on the 28th? Our last meeting, it looked like we weren't going to get that many people here. The second week of May.
You may, just, I'll make it, we can make it on the 28th, we get enough to.
Okay, okay.
You're talking about June?
No,
No,
no.
wait, May?
That's on a Wednesday.
Tuesday. Second and fourth Tuesday of the month.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, so.
Thank you all for coming and putting in the overtime here. Thank you very much.
Well, luckily Hans has the keys, I guess, so he can
Oh, right.
shut the doors and.
Yeah. What's your last name? Sergeant. Sergeant. Yeah. Oh, you're doing a great job.